really cold, and I just, yeah. Mm.
Hello
Shouldn't
and
happen here.
welcome to the Talenza webinar. I was just chatting away with Jamie Holder, our special guest today, who's been an absolute soldier for us today. Thank you for joining, Jamie, for putting up with the illness and the COVID that's going around. I know I had it a few weeks ago and you've got it now today, but we're really thankful to have your insights and your input today. I'd like to start in the spirit of reconciliation. Talenza acknowledges the traditional custodians of country from wherever you may be joining us today throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people today. I'm Simon Costa. I'm your host for the webinar today on our Tech Talent Outlook report. I'm also the customer director for the Transformation Group. I've been with our business since in Melbourne since June of 2022. So this is the third time I've been involved with this report, and it's the fourth time that we've produced the report as a business. In previous iterations, some of you may recall it as the Candidate Motivators report, and today we're going to be running through some of the data and some of the highlights that we will cover. And Jamie, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well as our special guest.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie. I'm the head of talent acquisition at MUFG Retirement Solutions, which is part of MUFG Pension and Market Services. At Retirement Solutions, our core mission and purpose is to help everyday Australians retire in the best way possible. So, to that end, we support superannuation funds with technology and business administration services. And relevant to today, our tech business has approximately 450 people in Australia, split across 8 technology domains.
Thanks for that, Jamie. We're very much looking forward to having your insights today and to share some of the stories as we go through some of the highlights. So the agenda today is we're going to take a look at some of the top drivers and some of the key themes that came from our report. Our report is produced after a survey which went out to over 900 or almost 1,000 respondents. There's actually a lot that we could cover, and we're not going to do all of it today, otherwise we'd be here for hours. But the key out of today is to give some insights into what was maybe a highlight or an anomaly, and then talk through some of those themes as we go through the webinar. The questions are also open, so feel free to leave a question which we can get to through the webinar, or if we have time at the end as well. So why does it matter? I think taking a step back, over the last probably 3 to 4 years, we've seen complete changes in how much the talent pool has had an ease or a difficulty in finding positions within technology transformation and the digital markets. We've seen a flip from a very candidate-led market where companies are battling for the same talent and throwing all kinds of money and positions and opportunities around to, in the last few years, where it's flipped almost completely the opposite way. And there's been right sizing, layoffs, in some cases, hiring freezes. And you combine that with a general feel of a return to the office in different cities that has different impacts and progression presenting in different ways. Also, the effect of best practice leadership having a bit of a shake up with what the expectations come from our talent pool. And then in general, what that might mean for our people. So one thing is for certain, being focused on your people is good for business, and our data shows that what the expectations of the talent pool is for the people is changing. So we need to look at that and see what changes with them. So I'll ask you first, Jamie, before I jump into a bit more data and highlights, is when you see a stat here that 70% of respondents in our survey said that they would like to change jobs within the next 12 months. What do you see from not only within your business, but maybe some of the conversations you've had recently at Smart Recruiters, at ATC, with some of your peers about the talent pool and what they feel that might resonate with this or maybe contradict it?
Yeah, sure. Look, it absolutely resonates, and I don't think it should be a surprise given the things that you've mentioned, and given the highs and lows of the last 3 or 4 years for the tech industry as a whole. Um, I think between the highs of the inflated salaries and the sign-on bonuses and retention bonuses that we saw um, in that sort of mid to late COVID period, um, and they were never sustainable for businesses. The pullback of that, the big firms letting go of a lot of tech people, it's been a really turbulent market, and I'm not surprised that people, candidates, and tech employees are feeling it. Secondly, there's obviously the cost of living conversation. We can't really go past that. And when we're talking about this, household budgets are tight. I know when we ran our EVP project, November last year through to February this year, 60% of our tech staff that were interviewed said that they had thought about leaving, and half of those again said that they'd thought of leaving, and that money was the primary factor. So this doesn't really surprise me, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's both points you make we're going to cover as we go through the webinar, but it's surprising to see the flip within such a short period of time as well.
Mm,
We'll
mm,
cover some of the changes in trends that we've seen as we've run the report over the years. But what I will say, in addition to what you have, is that it's probably a greater expectation from our talent pool in the markets that we've covered for this survey. The factors outside of control of the business, like the cost of living, state of the economy, high interest rates, in combination with the factors that companies can control. So whether that be salaries, whether it be non-monetary benefits, combined to probably lead us to this stat, is a general sort of sense of feeling of concern with maybe finding a new position, and the desire for stability, which we'll touch on later. And that can lead people to being not necessarily unhappy, but content, or leading to being unhappy in their role, but comfortable. And comfortable at the moment in the economy, in the way that the state is probably the feeling that people have. And that's why they probably view the future as a good time to leave, as opposed to right now, and they're not making those decisions. And it's a pretty significant number if you think about the percentage of that talent pool, both in terms of talent retention, but also attraction. Because there's that balance of, if people start to move on from your own business, but others in the market are not willing to leave yet, there can be a hole left. So employees and candidates are very intentional in their terms of when they look for a new role. So it's interesting when we consider the number of businesses with stringent return to office mandates. It might just be an increase from 2 to 3 days, or it could be a full 5-day, or whatever it might be, and how that will also impact, which is all stuff that we'll touch on shortly anyway. So this next slide is the overall data. So this is the overall result of our survey. So number one at the top there is that work-life balance is the most important factor this year that came back from our talent pool and our respondents. And it's the first time that we've seen that in 4 years. It's been growing, but it's the first time it's been number one. The way that we get to that answer is we ask all of our respondents to rank all of the answers that you can see on the side of the funnel, and give us their top 5. We don't ask them for in order, so not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but just what those 5 would be. And the percentage you can see on the side is the result. So the number of people that had it in their 5 responses. Last year, salary and benefits. This year, salary and benefits is number 2, and flexible working arrangements are number 3. Flexible working arrangements are potentially a bit lower on the list because in some cases it's customary or it's expected. There's been that shift, certainly in the post-COVID world, where having flexible work arrangements is just the standard. And as a result, it's not front of mind when people respond to our survey. And in the last 4 years, the results are that this year we've obviously got work-life balance in at number 1. Last year it was flexible working, and the 2 years prior to that, it was having an attractive salary and benefits. There are some interesting points to pull out of this. So every year that we've run the survey, when we drill down into gender, females have always ranked work-life balance as number 1. So that's consistent across each of the 4 years that we've run the survey. And when we break down via job family, another anomaly is that the cyber teams, so people working in the cyber or security area, have always had attractive salary and benefits number 1, including this year. And that probably speaks to cyber being one of the recruitment markets, certainly, that hasn't been as affected by the state of the economy. It's still got a pretty large disparity between demand and supply. And as a result, the demand for salary as a result, the people in that market feeling maybe the effects of the economy is probably a little less. Anything there that sort of jumps out at you, Jamie, or anything to share that you can see?
Yeah, those top three definitely resonate as well. Salary, I mentioned earlier when I spoke with the cost of living, that's obviously playing a role. People do want more money. Work-life balance for us is a really, really positive story, I think. So it didn't present in our EVP survey as the reasons that people in our tech organization were looking to move on, but it definitely presented as a reason why people like working for us. So I'll just talk a little bit about what we do. But I think the first reason is that for us, people like working for us and stay with us because we do have a hybrid model. So we've only just gone to a 50% return to office a fortnight between March and May this year. And on top of that, we also have a pretty good flexible work policy, which predates COVID and is leveraged throughout the business. So our tech people are mostly not in the office for more than 2 days a week. And then with the flexible work policy, that means people can have individual arrangements around things like childcare, school drop-offs, sports commitments, and so on. So that way of working is really embedded in our organization. In the EVP survey, we had staff saying things like, "I know I can go and get more money somewhere else, but I also know I'm not going to get the flexibility that I have here, and that's why I've chosen to stay." And I think that's really powerful when you're talking about your EVP. But obviously, we all know EVP has to be really authentic. So for us, that work-life balance, it's become a bit of a retention lever for us as well as an attraction lever. You did mention gender, so I will just say we have very, very strong female representation in our tech business. I think half of our leaders in our tech organization, so our heads of domains, I think 3 or 4 of them are female, and we've got strong representation of females right down through the ranks. So this doesn't surprise me. This resonates very strongly with the data that we have internally.
Yeah. When you do you think having that diversity in decision making at the top there helps with forming your flexible working arrangements, the work from home and return to office policy, and how in general balanced, or you try to give work-life balance to your staff?
Generally, I think so. So our leadership team fluctuates between 49 to 55% female, generally across the organization. But also to give credit to our director of technology, he is always very, very aware and approaches recruitment with a gender lens. So he's always looking to have females in the mix. He's always willing to have that conversation. So I can't just say it's because of our female leadership. Devon does a really great job with it as well.
Maybe Devon's reading our report.
Maybe. Or maybe he just doesn't want me knocking on his door. I'm not sure. Either way, he does a great job.
The next slide, we'll talk about some of the key statistics. And I've touched on it before, but the 70% stat of people looking for a new role next year means that we know talent is going to be looking to move. It's just not necessarily right now. And so we're trying to assess through our survey and through our report, what are the things that they're going to be focused on finding in an employer when that happens, and providing a good work-life balance along with adequate compensation and benefits is playing the key role. Some of the key trends that we've seen this year are the focus on salary and benefits increasing in its percentages response to the number 2 driver. And it's no surprise, I use Sydney as a geographical region as an example, which I'll touch on later, but it's becoming increasingly expensive to live in a city like Sydney. So it's no surprise that when we touch on that later, that they actually prioritize salary and benefits higher than what other people do in other cities. And then you've got things like the non-monetary benefits, which are quite high on the radar for respondents and form part of the consideration when they're weighing up, do I stay? Do I leave? Am I happy? What do I talk about? So things like flexible working, time off, fringe benefits, and also professional development all came through in the survey. So these factors have value to the person, to the employee, and form part of their overall sense of value. And the non-monetary benefits can be one way that businesses might look at increasing the happiness or the retention score of what they have within their business without having to compete on salary. You've touched on a few there, Jamie, around your EVP survey and what that led to and why people stay. Have you had examples maybe from externally with people looking to join where that's been the attraction element?
100%. So across the board, including in tech, when we're talking to candidates, and obviously it's still one of the first questions that candidates will ask an internal recruitment team or an agency recruiter is this fully in the office? Is it fully remote or is it hybrid? A lot of people are really surprised when we say that it's 50% a fortnight. They're like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. So I think, there's this sort of almost tacit acceptance that organizations are moving back to full time in the office. And when candidates identify that it's a genuine hybrid role, they are pleasantly surprised. And then when you start talking, we talk to them about our flexible work policy at the front end of our process as well, using it as an attraction lever. That is also really pleasing and surprising to a lot of candidates. I think a lot of companies don't do a great job talking about it at the front end of the process. And I wouldn't be surprised if we retain people in our candidate pool as they go through a process because of it. Um, the one thing I will say, just touching on the EVP survey, and it's important because we all need to remember that everyone's an individual. And if you have a flexible working policy, it's got to be flexible to be tailored to individual needs. Like we had one person working remotely in the UK. The office had shut during COVID, and she was in the tech org, and she turned around to me and she said, "Well, working remotely, fully remote, has killed my engagement with this company." So we've got to be mindful that it goes both ways. Um, so it's important to consider that as well. It's not a one size fits all solution.
Absolutely. It's a really important point you make there. I think some people sometimes get lost with the fact that there's individuals behind the data. So we'll roll into our first key theme. We've got 4 to cover, and career progression is high on the agenda this year. I think there's a link that people are able to make between learning and development and their career development to a greater responsibility that might lead to promotion, which generally means more money. And in particular, our respondents that fit into either Gen Z or millennials had this higher on the list than anyone else. It was actually, if you break down by generation, it was their number one driver above work-life balance was career progression. So they make that link of, I'm in the stage of my career at the moment where I am growing. So that's a natural part of being a bit younger in the talent pool, but also probably more affected by the cost of living, possibly higher rents, higher mortgages, or trying to buy into their first home. Those sorts of impacts lead to people wanting greater responsibility in their job so that they can lead into greater career progression and eventually more money. So everything's all sort of linked in. Because of that desire for career progression as well, or lateral moves, or whatever that might be within a business, the talent pool are seeking more stability within a company for the promotion pathways. They want to know that they can possibly do that where they are. So they want to know the employer invests in development, provides quality training, and if you're going through a phase at the moment, which many are, where there's a reduced L&D budget or potentially people in that area have been laid off, there might be things that you need to think about creatively to help with pursuing that desire for career progression, like mentoring programs or internal mobility, or making sure that they all are fit for purpose within your business. Jane, I know when we've caught up previously, we've spoken a little bit about internal mobility because not everyone gets that right, and it's hard to do, particularly at the moment where maybe there aren't the opportunities within the business because of the state of the economy to move people around. What do you have to talk to about getting that assessment of internal mobility right and then implementing it?
Yeah, sure. So I think historically it's fair to say this isn't something that we've done particularly well. And as a result of the EVP survey and the data that we got, we've started putting some measures in place. Um, we also use LinkedIn Learning as our learning platform. So we've replaced our old LMS with LinkedIn Learning. And we're embedding LinkedIn Learning conversations into our performance reviews, into our one on one conversations. I'm using it in my goal setting for my team. And I know that the tech business is looking to do the same. Um, what's interesting is we have some really fascinating stories of people who have moved internally, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But the other things that we're implementing after those results came out of the EVP survey, that people were really looking for career progression. We had people saying they didn't know how to progress their careers internally with us, or who they could speak to about it. So we've kicked off a career pathways program, and we've relaunched what we call a Spark program, which is for frontline leaders. Um, so we're introducing measures to try and address this. But what is interesting is some of the stories that we have internally around internal career progression. Um, I was looking at some data the other day, and we've got a guy in our contact center who was there for 12 months. So he's on the phones, he's talking to super fund members, and after 12 months, he's now in an RPA role, a robotics process automation position with us. Now, obviously, there's probably a story behind how that's happened, but I think that that's a really exciting story to tell, because it means we're having the right conversations with our people. And then we've got a woman who started with us over 15 years ago as an admin, became an EA, moved into our insurance business, got moved onto a transformation project, started learning about tech, and she now runs a team in one of our tech domains. Um, and 15 years, that's a long time these days, for someone to stay with us. And we've got a lot of tenured staff, and the key to their tenure, it has been career progression. So it's something we're taking really seriously.
Yeah, the stories are important because, like you say,
Mm.
15 years in an organization, many people have had two careers in that time, let alone
Yeah.
the number of organizations. So they're great to share. So the second key theme that came out of our report is that pursuing of stability and security within an organization, and it's sort of like their financial security, kind of speaks to a little bit what you were just saying there, Jamie, about the career pathways, because you can't really have them without a stable company. So in the economy the way it is at the moment, people are more concerned at the moment about keeping their job, and they want to do that in an organization where job security is as stable as it can possibly be. So it probably results in them being less likely to want to move on, and they'll ride out a storm with an employer at the moment than they will take the risk. So there's a bit more of a risk aversion sort of mindset. We've seen that in the last 18 months, someone joining an organisation that wants to be around long term does want the financial stability of the company to be strong, but also have strong leadership, and being surrounded in an organisation where leadership can manage and guide them through whatever might be coming. So highlighting that you're a business that has strong backing, is financially stable, is performing well in the current climate, and has a good, strong leadership team, can offer candidates both in your current company and also those that you're looking to attract in a lot of confidence and assurance. And anecdotally, I can speak to our team here in Melbourne and across the wider Talenza business that when we're having conversations with the talent pools that we work with, job seekers and candidates are reflecting more on the risk aversion, like maybe running through a process, and unless they're completely comfortable, not taking up the offer that might be there, or not even willing to jump into it unless the market moves or something shifts, just because of that want for stability. And there seems to be this less likely approach to joining startups and scale-ups. It's been a lot, obviously, tougher in the last 12 months, 18 months than what it has been previously. Jamie, I think we've touched on a few conversations previously about that desire for stability and how that even might be affecting your contractor pool and
Yeah.
what they might be seeking. Would you like to share that with our viewers today?
Yeah, sure. It's something that it still surprises me, because I think the tech contracting space has always been quite strong. So we've had a number of projects which have concluded and new ones have begun, and we've had some of our daily rate contractors request to go on fixed term or permanent contracts, which is relatively unusual, I think. And we've had almost everyone that's been on a fixed term contract want to shift to permanent, which is understandable when people are looking for stability. Um, in regards to the younger cohort, it seems to be more driven around, "I'll never be able to get a mortgage if I'm contracting." So there's a little bit of that playing in, but across the board, there is this real concern around our future growth plans. Candidates are asking us, "What's happening in your world? Where are your future growth plans? Are they in Australia? Are they in India? Are they in our other geographies?" And so on. So it's definitely playing out when we're talking to candidates that there's this concern around organizational stability and role stability.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We see that flip with the market. It tips back the other way as soon as it picks up, and rates in the contractor market lift
Yeah.
again.
I was
What the
going to say, it's
desire
not going to stay like
is,
this.
yeah, well, it's just the opposite of that inflated side that we saw for the last few years previous.
Mm.
So this next key theme, it didn't come through in the top 5 in any of the breakdowns, but the reason that I'm mentioning it is it's been a pattern or a trend that we've been following in the 4 years of our report that has been increasing slightly every year. So this values alignment is probably linked to a couple of things, but in 2024, we saw an uptick in people that want to work for an employer who had strong values and a moral compass. So there's a mismatch between your own personal or organizational values and maybe the people you work with or the organization overall. Then people will use that maybe as part of the reason to not accept a job or part of the reason to start looking, but not the whole reason. It will make up a form of it. It won't be the entirety. But people do want to see, the talent pool do want to see organizations that talk the talk, also walk the walk. And they won't accept things like just a pitch deck on values. They want to see people living and breathing their values and their purpose every day. So 35% of our tech employees moved jobs because of inconsistent values over the last 12 months. So it's a mismatch between theirs and the companies. And it's lower than some of the other reasons and some of the other significant reasons, but it does actually increase when we talk about executives, which is an interesting stat. I think the other thing to highlight in this particular area is that it's as the talent pool within millennials and Gen Z grows, the respondents that have a higher value on values alignment also grows. And obviously that will continue as more and more boomers start to enter the retirement phase and there's more younger generations coming through that have this sense of, I want to work with purpose and I have these values and I want to make sure that everything is aligned. Do you have some insights or some stories to share around that, Jamie?
Yeah, there's a few stories. I think the first thing I will say is I worked for a biotech several years ago now, and we were talking about this back in 2016,
Yeah.
2017, preparing for the next generation coming through and really emphasizing our corporate social responsibility programs as an attraction lever for that upcoming generation. But if I think back to our tech EVP survey results, if you recall, I said 60% of the people in our tech organization said they'd thought about leaving. 0% of them cited value alignment um, or perception of values as a reason that they would look to move. And 0% of them said it was something that we could focus on to increase their engagement or try to make them stay. So, part of that, I think, is because as an organization, we've got a very clear, simple, unambiguous mission and purpose, which is helping everyday Australians retire in the best way possible. And that really leaches into everything that we do. Um, so it's really hard for people not to understand that value, purpose, mission, um, and it guides everything we do, and everyone sees it from the top down. Our CEO, almost every monthly town hall, all employee town hall, it's one of the first things she says. So it is a top-down value alignment, and I think, ooh, fingers crossed right now. I think we've got it right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's the important thing to highlight again is even in our survey response, it wasn't in the top five for any
mm,
of the breakdowns: gender, generation, job, family, geography, but it's a growing factor. So we're
yeah,
noticing it, it's a pattern and it's a trend and it's something that we should follow. And like you say, you've been following it since 2016, I think you mentioned. So
mm,
it's
mm.
something to be aware of and to follow and to make sure that in your case, you've got a great purpose. And are you telling the story? Are people aware and are they connected? And if they are, it won't be a reason for people to either leave or think about leaving.
Yeah, it's a contributing factor, and I think it's here to stay.
Yeah. The final key theme is this emphasis on financial stability and compensation. So over the last 18 months, we've seen that flip from a candidate-led market where companies were, as I mentioned before, fighting for the same talent and offering inflated salaries to lock people in, high sign-on bonuses, all kinds of financial measures to get people locked in to a new role. And as that has flipped, in conjunction with interest rates going up, inflation going up, so just the general cost of living being much higher, we've seen salary jump up to number 2 on the list this year, but also the percentage of respondents that had it in their top 5 increased as well. So we could see from this year's salary guide that there's been a salary guide that we run. There's been a standardization of money, so pay in terms of permanent salary, but also within contractor rates across Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. But in Melbourne and Sydney in particular, the impacts are probably being felt a little higher, where 20% of people across our salary guide survey that actually left their current job for less money into their new job. They accepted a role on less money. And part of that also speaks to the inflated salaries in the past, but also a little bit to just the state of the economy at the moment. And it might also explain why 70% of the talent pool are looking to change jobs in the next 12 months and not do it right now because they can't see where they can match or greater their salary. Some of them are sitting and waiting for that economic turn. Jamie, you had some feedback in your EVP survey about the live experiences in the talent pool with candidates looking to join your organisation. I think we spoke about, most people will leave, this is anecdotally, but they'll ask for at least a 10%
Yeah,
increase in their salary. It doesn't always match the bandings, and sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But how
yeah.
do you manage that on your end or from what you hear with your colleagues and peers in the industry?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, obviously, we have salary conversations pretty early in the process with a candidate. We do have banded salaries, and that's a way of ensuring equity in the organisation. So, we don't pay above the band. So if a candidate comes to us and in that early stage they're above the band, we'll have that conversation with them, and the onus is back on them to decide whether they want to go forward or not. We are seeing a trend of people asking for increases that we would not expect to see in this current market.
Mhm.
And so we have pretty transparent conversations with them, and then again, the onus is back on them. Um, I think you mentioned earlier about the shorter, um, market trends, the swings. I think they are getting shorter and shorter, and I think there's a lot of onus on talent functions now and agencies to report trends early to the business, because I think we will see another shift back in the favor, it's a pendulum, right, of
Yeah.
candidates. Um, as an organization, we actually made the decision not to play the sign-on high salary game when that was out in the market. And I'm not going to lie, we're amongst friends here. It meant that we in the TA function had to look at what other levers we had to attract and retain talent. And that's where that combination of hybrid and flexible work um, came into play quite strongly. Regarding our EVP survey, fortunately, some of that market correction and downward push on salaries was already happening when we started that survey. So I don't think it impacted the results in the way it could have if we'd done it even 6 months earlier, if we'd done it in the middle of last year. Um, So that was really fortunate. And the other thing I will say is I think it was a smart decision, not to pump up our exec, but I think it was a smart decision not to play that game, because the other thing that doesn't feature in the EVP survey is commentary around peers being brought into the organization on inflated salaries, which obviously leads to inequity and relativity issues, but also can create behavioral and performance issues when people are disgruntled that someone's come on and they find that they're on more money than them.
Mm.
Um, so I think it was the right thing to do. It absolutely created challenges for us trying to attract talent. But yeah, I think, yeah, everything you've commented about the state of the market that we've come out of and we've come into, I think reflects this. Yeah.
Yeah. It all works in combination, doesn't it? Because you can't always be
Yeah.
the best payer with the best return to office policy and the best flexible working.
Yeah.
And it's that combination of what works for the business. You take your
Yeah.
values alignment, your purpose, and you match that with the type of people you're trying to bring into your organization. And what this report's just trying to highlight is what the general talent pool are feeling. You'll have different breakdowns within that. I'll touch a little bit on that next, where that might differ. And you can
Mm,
attract and retain people based on different things.
yeah.
And some of them include the job specialization or job family. I'm not going to cover all of the statistics. We can get that from our report. We'll share a link at the end as well in the webinar and in the chat, where you can click into the link for the report. But we have the ability to break down our respondents' data based on their job family. I'll just use one example. Looking at the data and BI market, our survey told us that those respondents were less likely to look for a new role in the next 12 months than the general market. So the general market response was 70%, and it's 61 with the data and BI market. And I think that's reasonably consistent with what you see as well, Jamie.
Yeah. Yeah. We're seeing these trends play out in our business across the broader organization as well. But um, I think we touched on what I think is going to be the solution earlier, which is that skills development and training that leads to real career progression, and data and BI. I think that's just a no-brainer. That's going to be massive. As AI continues to generate, mega data for us. Um, I think what makes this both scary and not scary, if you look at data BI, but at the others, we're racing towards 2030, and we've been hearing for years that there's going to be a global skill deficit to the tune of 85 million people by 2030. And I think we have to be realistic that tech's not going to be immune. It will be impacted. It's not going to magically get easier to find talent. So, linking development and career opportunities, I think, is the smart play. Um, and interestingly, I was having a conversation with Devon, our tech director, the other day, and we were looking at the last 3 years of our recruitment data for technology, um, specifically his highly repeatable roles and his hard to fill roles and roles where we were consistently blowing out on time to fill. Um, and as an example, we have one role there where, as an organization, we do ourselves a massive disservice and we do what every recruiter hates, and we combine two skill sets that don't naturally sit together, and we combine them into one role. And we go, okay, TA, go out and find this person. And so we have to go out and find them. So I was having a conversation with him around, well, with the advent of AI, um, is the skill set for this role going to change? Is there an internal employee pool that we could look at developing to build into these roles? And I think that's going to be the solution. I mean, cyber's already problematic. The demand has well outstripped supply already. Um, so I think we just need to be really smart about how we start solving some of these problems.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. Like I said, we can talk for days on the different
Yeah.
job families. The information's in the report if anyone wants to go and have a look. I'll do a quick breakdown on each of the key cities that we have offices in and that we represent, being Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane, because there are some differences between them. Melbourne had a much higher rate of respondents that were focused on work-life balance, and it could be for a number of reasons. There are many employees who manage to hold on to their job while they're watching their colleagues. either be made redundant or having reorgs throughout organisations where they've possibly picked up more work. They're bridging the gap with more hours and not necessarily getting the same work-life balance as they did a year or two ago. And Melbourne also has a higher unemployment rate than the other two cities that we work in, just Melbourne, the city itself. So when you break that out geographically, that also leads to a little bit of that concern of I'll stay now, accept the less work-life balance that I have right now, because of the concern of what I'm seeing around. There seems to be a general reluctance in Melbourne as well to come back into the office with some of the return to office policies. A lot of companies that a lot of customers we have some sort of policy in place. It's not necessarily measured, it's not necessarily enforced, and some of the people enforcing them don't follow them themselves. So it seems to be adding into some of the thinking around, I don't want to really upset the cart here with those sort of factors, which is why flexible working for Melbourne was actually lower on the ranking there, because it is still kind of custom. And hybrid working plays a part in that. Have you got some insights to share there with what you see on data coming through?
Yeah, Melbourne, bless us. And no, to be fair, we were locked down longer than anyone else in the world,
This is true.
and
2
we learned
years, we
that,
remember.
and we learned that we could be effective working from home. So, I do want to touch on the return to office piece, and I think there was a question around how we measure it. Um, the really honest answer is we don't. We ask our leaders to take responsibility for measuring it. We can access, building swipe card access reports and facility reports and so on. Um, I don't think as a leadership group we're in that place where we're really ready to do that in a structured way. So um, we saw resistance when we implemented even 50% of time in the office a fortnight. And in Melbourne,
Yeah.
more than any other geography,
Yep.
we saw a massive increase in flexible working requests. We saw an increase in health and safety reasons as to why people were saying they couldn't come into the office. And we also saw an increase in mental well-being reasons discussed with HR as to why people couldn't return to the office. So our poor HR team were inundated for a while, but I think as as people realised that we were still willing to have the flexible working policy conversation, that has calmed down. And as I said, we're not measuring it. It's up to leaders to manage it in their teams. For my team, they must come in on a Tuesday as our anchor day. We have collaboration time, and then they come in one other day of the week. And I measure that because I'm in the office 3-4 days a week, so I see them. That's how I'm measuring it.
Yeah.
Or I'm online with my Sydney people, so we know. Um, so
And
yeah,
the flexible
this
working
does,
part with that, Jamie, maybe on
yeah,
you have your anchor day, but you've got staff that, as an example, they've got kids to do school drop off with
yeah.
and pick
I
up, and
think in our Melbourne team, I'm one of 2 that don't have children.
yeah,
And so one of them, she drops her toddler off at daycare early, so she's typically in by 9. The others are usually in by 9, 9:30, 10 o'clock. Sometimes they do the school run, but they leave early as well. And I think the key to managing that, so for me, it's I know if they're not doing their job, because in talent acquisition, the business starts screaming if we're not delivering, right? So I don't hear any business noise about any of them. Um, I'll check in with them, and if I'm moving a meeting or something, and just say, "Hey, is this going to work?" They might say, "Yes, I can dial in from the car," or "No, that's not going to work," and that's fine. So it really depends on your approach to managing it. I think some managers who don't maybe have the skills and resources to manage it effectively can go very hardline, and that turns people off very quickly. And then
mm,
there are other managers who go the other way and don't have the skills and resources to manage it, and they just let it slide. And I think that's a bit of a disservice maybe to everyone else, but that's the manager and leader's responsibility to manage.
yeah,
That's
that's
my
right.
position.
Yeah, the flexible working is the point. Is it's flexible. You made it before as well. Is that
Mm,
everyone's an individual. So what's flexible
yeah,
for one is not necessarily flexible for another.
yeah, 100%.
Sydney. So when you geographically isolate the data from just our city respondents, the number one driver for them was actually salary and benefits. It's not a surprise, I touched on it before, but they have the higher real estate costs. So things like inflation and higher interest rates have a greater impact on people in Sydney with their general living. We also saw that in Sydney, almost 1 in 5, so 19% of the respondents were most worried about in the next 12 months when we asked the question, finding a new job. And we didn't ask this in the survey, I wish we did, but we assume that some of that has to go with the salary requests, the desire for a higher salary. I think across New South Wales in August this year, or maybe a bit earlier, the largest employer in the Southern Hemisphere, which is the New South Wales government, sent an email to everyone working in the public sector that they should work principally in the office, in an approved office. I think Sydney's office vacancy rate when we checked was at 11.6%. So not quite as high as the amount of vacant offices still here in Melbourne, but relatively high. And there's that push to be a good corporate citizen and support cafes and local business and that overall general vibe in the city. But there are still those voting with their feet and not necessarily heading into the office. When searching for a new role, Jamie, we assume part of it is always due to salary. But the other part, which came out of the Sydney responses, was something you've just touched on before around AI and what development people might get so that they're not as impacted by changing roles in technology and with more automation. Do you have anything further to add around concerns that any of your staff or any others of your peers are talking about in the industry around how they're managing that?
How are people managing it? Look, so I was at the Smart Recruiters event a couple of weeks ago, and I was at ATC last week. And there was a lot of conversation about AI and role augmentation. And I think, part of that conversation I mentioned before when I was having a discussion with the tech director around AI and the impact it's going to have, part of that was, our developer roles. Um, if universities, as they are teaching people to use open AI tools to create code, does the role of a developer or a coder then become checking the code, and what else? Does it become soft skill? Do they need more soft skills? Do they need AI and machine learning proficiency? So maybe we're going to have AI and ML developers. Obviously, automation and RPA skills, robotic process automation, those will be, I guess, highly desirable as well. Cybersecurity, no brainer. It's obviously going to continue to challenge us. Demands outstrip supply. But I think the interesting piece is where will we start to see some interdisciplinary links and skills, and what soft skills are the people going to need. I will just touch on Sydney. We see much less resistance to coming into the office. We have 2 offices, one in George Street in the CBD and one out in Parramatta. So generally people can get to us if they're kind of along that corridor. We don't really have too many issues with that coming into the office piece. So that doesn't resonate so much for Sydney with us.
Yeah, it's pretty consistent with the difference we find between Melbourne and Sydney. There's still some people that obviously have that desire, but it's certainly not as high as what we find in Melbourne. The last city to cover is Brisbane, and Brisbane sits apart from Melbourne and Sydney when it comes to the drivers. It had very different responses, and Brisbane, of the 3 cities, had the lowest unemployment rate. So it's lower than both Melbourne and Sydney, and 1 in 4 people in Brisbane are employed in the energy and resources sector. So that work has been a lot more stable over the last 2 years, as opposed to the industries that primarily lead Sydney and Melbourne. There is a higher focus in Brisbane on flexible working, and they're most concerned about in the next 12 months maintaining a good work-life balance. And that speaks a little bit to the experiences they had over COVID, where not really, not as impacted as what Victoria certainly were, and even as New South Wales. And that's that general feel of the desire for more flexible working. And the thing that they're most concerned about is to have that balance in the future. Jamie, when we've touched on it, we've spoken a bit about the general workforce up in Queensland, because it is kind of a bit interlinked, not just in technology with work-life balance. And we also spoke a little bit about Queensland is perceived as that place to go for balance. People move to the Gold Coast, as an example, from Melbourne, to have better weather, more relaxed lifestyle, and they kind of pick work a little bit after that as the second thought. What insights do you have to share on like lifestyle and those drivers up in Queensland?
Yeah, look, I think most people in Melbourne are familiar with the mass exodus from Victoria as people tried to escape COVID restrictions, and a lot of people went to Queensland. And I think some of that is going to play out into your work-life balance data. Um, so I'm not really surprised by this. I worked in two different organisations over the COVID period, and in both cases we had staff that relocated to Queensland as a lifestyle decision. And I think the challenge with that is, as organisations transition back to this working in the office model, where does that leave those people? Are there enough remote roles for them to remain in Queensland or Brisbane and maintain a work-life balance style that they enjoy? And I think the reality is, if Australian organisations mandate that those people return to the office, they'll obviously, in some cases, have to resign if there is not an office locally in Brisbane. And that means that we'll lose people, good tech people, to international organisations that have that remote flex approach. Um, I'm aware as well that there are organisations, obviously, in Australia that have put their stick in the sand and said, we will support our people working 100% remote and we're not going to mandate a return to the office. I think they're going to be the tech winners, as they're going to be better positioned to compete for talent, particularly for that talent that has relocated out of Victoria during COVID, because a lot of them just don't want to come back. They've sold their properties here, or they've brought up there. They don't want to come back here.
Yeah, it's very true. The next slide is just a little bit of a summary of what moved on the trends from last year to this year. I won't go through all of them. Again, we can get that from the report. But there's just a couple I wanted to highlight as stats that came through, including the working for a company that's financially healthy, the 12% increase in response from last year to this year. And the other obvious one, which we've already touched on, the salary driver, the increased importance of salary as the economy has shifted and the cost of living is far more significant. Jamie, like we spoke a bit about these trends when we caught up, and you had a little bit to say on how people are also less likely to put up with poor management or poor management styles, and that's becoming a greater driver for what you're seeing.
Yeah, so in our EVP survey, we asked the question, what do you like about working here? And managers were actually our number two, our second highest result. However, they were also our second highest result for have you ever thought about leaving and why? So it's a really interesting one that plays out. Personality comes into it. Politics can come into it. Career disengagement. So if someone has not been able to uh, progress their career, sometimes, for better or worse, managers are the ones that, bear the brunt of that unsettled nature. But there's always been a sentiment of don't put a poor performer beside me in my team as a peer. And I think, and I'm not sure if it's a resilience thing post COVID, or people are just generally not willing to put up with it anymore. I think people are going to are voting more quickly with their feet when they have a poor manager that they can't get away from. In the EVP project, and this is really stuck in my head, one employee who had said that they had thought of leaving, when I asked her why, she fired straight away back that her manager was the reason. And so I said, "Oh, so why do you stay?" And she said, "They're not my manager anymore, so I'm staying because I love it here." And that's really stuck with me. It's really powerful, right? So yeah, that's stuck with me.
There's one I'd like to highlight on decreasing trends as well. So in the state that we're in, again, economically, an 8% decrease in having a good reputation, working for a company that has a good reputation, probably exists for a number of reasons. And the first one is it's harder to find work. So if you're out of work and you're looking for a new role, being able to be picky on something like working for an organization that has a good reputation can be more difficult. Doesn't necessarily change your value, but it changes in importance if you haven't been able to earn an income for a period of time. But also, it's becoming a little bit more subjective. And I'll give a couple of examples. There are some that are consistent, like the perception of working for a cigarette company, for example. But then there are others that change with news and trends. And the recent or current example I can give of that is Channel 9. You're in the news for all the wrong reasons. But that's almost forgotten within sort of 3 to 6 months once that's dealt with. And so people are starting to resonate with that trend and change and see it as not as important in the current state we're in, but it is something I expect to increase as that goes through. Anything to add on that?
Look, I agree. I think the only thing I'll say here is, as you said, we're in a tight job market. Power has swung back from candidates to companies. It's a bit of a, kind of pendulum swing, so I don't expect that this is going to last. And when the market does shift and jobs are more widely available, candidates will become more selective again. They'll cherry pick. It's what we do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Thank you very much for your time, Jamie.
No
We've had
problem.
a few questions we've tried to answer through the Q&A as we've gone along. There's a couple in there that we haven't been able to get to as we're running out of time, but I'll follow up with those people after.
Yeah,
Appreciate
sure.
your input. Thanks for joining, even with the
No
COVID.
problem.
And for anyone that would like to, our marketing team's going to pop the link for the report, if you'd like to have a look at the full report, into the chat for the webinar. And I hope you enjoyed our insights and our highlights today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jamie.